Alright, so here we are, Restoring Southern Power. This is Unit 1, Section 3, and your objective would be to analyze the end of Reconstruction period in the South. So first we're going to start off talking about Grant's administration. Alright, remember President Grant, and he became president after Johnson. So, political scandals and an economic depression really tarnished Grant's presidency. He was involved in a myriad of scandals, one of the most scandalous presidencies of all time, especially his cabinet, which was just filled with corrupt individuals looking to gain a buck. So, Grant's lack of political experience helped to divide the Republican Party and undermine support for Reconstruction. People started not supporting it because they didn't support the Republicans in their agenda. Now, during Grant's first term of office, the Republican-controlled Congress continued just like they were with Johnson and to a small part with Lincoln, just continued to run the show. Alright, Congress, the radical Republican-controlled Congress was controlling the country. Now, at the same time, expanded the programs they introduced in the Civil War, and we're going to have this New South, which we'll talk about later, but this New South will be about industry and commerce, which will try to help the South get into, the modern era of that time. And one thing that Congress did, one thing Congress kept, were these sin taxes. These are taxes on all things that the Bible would consider a sin, anything like whiskey, playing cards, tobacco. All this stuff was taxed very heavily. And that's how the government made a lot of their money from this sin tax. And so people's sins paid for the Civil War. Alright, so your Democrats and some Republicans were concerned that men who were in office to make money and sell influence were beginning to dominate the Republican Party. Like I said, one of the most corrupt cabinets in history. Everybody was out for themselves. Everybody was out to make a buck. So not good. Not good. Now, your more liberal Republicans, the opposite of your radical Republicans, they left the Republican Party. They're like, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of being associated with these radicals. I'm done with this. And so they're going to nominate Horace Greeley for the next election to take on Grant. There's old Greeley right there. Now, the Democratic Party also nominated Greeley. So it's going to be Greeley versus Grant. And Grant's going to, of course, win. But during his second term, like many presidents, including Barack Obama, scandals ensue. And so scandals and an economic depression, it's very similar to today. It's a little bit history repeated itself. And it really did hurt Grant's reputation. And it really did hurt his administration and his legacy. Alright, and since the question you're going to answer when you take a note of this is how can scandals affect the presidency? We'll talk about that in class. And so Grant's Secretary of War accepted bribes and then effectively resigned before he could be impeached. When he was found out, he's like, okay, I'm done, I quit. You've been accepting bribes. He wasn't the only one. There was more people accepting bribes. It's just corruption all around. And perhaps none larger than the whiskey ring scandal. This is the doozy. This is the one that really does Grant in and tarnishes his legacy. Now, the whiskey ring scandal, it's 1875. Part one of it was a large distillers bribed government officials in order to keep the tax money for themselves. Alright, I'll bribe you with whiskey if I get to keep the tax money. I have to pay this tax, this whiskey tax. Alright, and so the large distillers had an advantage over the smaller ones. Also, there was this official stamp that we placed on alcohol to pay taxes, and someone was basically stealing these stamps and selling them for cash. Hence, the large distilleries bribing government officials. And an investigator found out that it was one of Grant's friends, but Grant wouldn't believe him, and so what does Grant do? Yeah, Grant fires the investigator. Hence, basically laying blame on himself for the entire whiskey ring scandal. Yeah, that didn't go over very well. Alright, as you see, here's the election of 1872. A lot of different candidates. Right? And so we have Grant winning. In a large part thanks to the Democratic Party being split. And as we all know, if your party is split, you're not going to win the election because you split the entire votes. You have, here's your Republicans, here's your Democrats. Alright? Well, when it comes to election, people vote party lines, and so Republicans, hey, they get all their votes. Democrats, they split, and so they get half of the votes. So, in this case, 5 different Democrats. You're not going to win an election. I mean, let's face it, Grant was a shoo-in here, despite the scandals and everything. And then we have a banking panic. On top of scandals, we have a panic of 1873, when the financial community was in ruins because debt and the Civil War, and it just was not good. Was not good. So, in review of this section, slow economic recovery, a corrupt cabinet, and the whiskey ring scandal put a bad mark on Grant's presidency. Not very good. Alright, so next part. Alright, Reconstruction is finally over, but not without some controversy. We love that in history, some controversy. Now, after Republican Rutherford B. Hayes, he becomes president in his disputed election of 1877. He removed the last federal troops from the South as part of a compromise deal. Actually, election of 1876, excuse me. And by appealing to white racism and defining elections as a struggle between whites and African Americans, the Democrats basically were able to win support of people in the South. Because remember, the whole reason the KKK was formed. These Democrats are, mad at the Republicans because the Republicans allow African Americans into politics, and they don't like it. And so Democrats were able to win many votes, many supports in the South, and thought they were going to win this election too. Now, in 1876, Democrats take control of all southern states, right, except Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida. Those 3 will be main states to keep in mind, right? South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida. Remember those. Now, Republicans are going to nominate Hayes, and Democrats nominate Tilden, right, to run in this election. Right, and of course it is the 1876 election, not 1877 election, because, yeah. Alright, so, the election of 1876. There's been so much election fraud in this election that both sides had no one knew who was going to win. Alright? Now, basically, the election fraud comes down to 3 states. And you guys said Louisiana, Florida, and South Carolina. Oh, not a good deal. So, who's going to win the presidency? I don't know, because there's so much fraud. They're basically going to throw this election out the window and give it up to 12 guys to decide who's going to be the next president. Right? And so, to resolve the situation, right, Congress is going to appoint a 15-person commission made up of equal members of House, Senate, and Supreme Court, and they're going to decide who the next president of the United States is. This is the first time this has ever happened, and the only time it has ever happened in American history. And so, one thing they do which is good, is, you guessed it, the most important word in all of government: compromise, compromise, compromise. And, well, they compromise. And so, with the Electoral Commission of 1876, they are on your screen, all 15 of them. And so Hayes was elected, and the outcome was known as the Compromise of 1877. Very key, very important. The Compromise of 1877 ends the election of 1876 controversy, and Hayes becomes president. Now, it comes down to the South here. Alright? It comes down to the South basically saying, I will allow this Republican to become president if you give us what we want. And so this compromise is formed here, where the Republicans get their president, but the South gets what they want in return for allowing the Republicans to have their president. And so Hayes would become president if there was a Southerner in the cabinet, which turned out to be the Postmaster General, goes to a Democrat. A railroad would be built in the South, which it had to be built anyways, but it's going to be built now. And martial law would end, and Reconstruction would be over. So that's the Compromise of 1877, right there. Democrats would agree to let Republican Hayes become president if they get the Postmaster General, they get a railroad, and Reconstruction ends. And they agree. So in April 1877, Hayes pulled the federal troops out of the South. So long, Reconstruction. You are now officially done. Over with. So here's the presidential election of 1876. The election map. You got Hayes and Tilden, right? Hayes in the yellow, Tilden in the green. And you see South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana. Now, if they would have voted without election fraud, Tilden would have won the election. But they're going to give, they're all going to give their votes, the electoral votes, to Hayes, effectively giving Hayes the election, so the South, can get what they want. And in review, election of 1877, Representative Hayes, for the Republican Party, Democrat Tilden. Corrupt election, Louisiana, South Carolina, Florida, led to no one winning outright. Led to the Compromise of 1877. The South will vote for Representative Hayes, and they get what they want. Reconstruction officially ends in 1877, and there I go again, calling it the election of 1877, but it's the election of 1876. Keep that in mind, the election of 1876, the Compromise of 1877. Alright, so long, we'll see you next time. Don't forget to study history.